And welcome to the National Town Hall entitled From Common Ground to Congressional Action, Advancing the Universal Charitable Deduction. I'm Sylvia Acevedo, CEO of Girl Scouts of the USA, and I will serve as the MC for today's event. I'm honored to be part of this unprecedented National Town Hall meeting. This is a remarkable milestone for the nonprofit sector, with 5 U.S. senators representing both sides of the aisle and far corners of our country coming together to support a universal charitable deduction. Over the past 3 months, our nation has been rocked with a health crisis, which has triggered an economic crisis. And in the past week, our nation has once again fallen victim to the scourge of racial unrest, with tensions that have boiled over in many of our communities. The nonprofits who are participating in this town hall in all 50 states and hundreds of thousands more across the country keenly understand the impact these challenges are having on America. Nonprofits across the country play an important role in working to build community cohesion, ease social tensions, build bridges between people, and protect social foundations upon which our nation was built. As a sector, we reflect the wide and diverse spectrum of priorities in our communities. We are the fabric of America. We stand on the front lines addressing ongoing and emergency needs, especially for the most vulnerable. We celebrate education, arts, and culture. We nourish the hungry, build homes, care for the sick. We plant trees, clean waterways, and work to preserve our planet. We provide jobs, often to our neighbors who have challenges finding employment, and offer job training that can pave the path to self-reliance. We nurture our young people and encourage them to aspire to be tomorrow's leaders. We are an indispensable part of every community, every day. And we serve as a bedrock, as a stabilizing force to weather even the darkest days. But we must have resources to do our work. The coronavirus pandemic has dealt a devastating blow to most of us. The decisive action by the 5 senators joining us today serves as a beacon of hope. As everyone attending this town hall likely knows, the CARES Act that passed in March included a universal charitable deduction, which allows for $300 above the line deduction for non-itemizers. That was a great start. These 5 senators are taking the next step, proposing to greatly expand the charitable deduction during this pandemic by increasing the amount of the deduction. Their aim is to encourage more charitable giving by individuals. This proposal will help all of us in our fundraising efforts, but it also demonstrates a commitment to providing a charitable giving tax incentive to all taxpayers, regardless of their income level or whether they itemize. Charitable giving is an important reflection of our individual values and the priorities we support. The more we can encourage charitable giving, the better we can address a broad range of community needs. And the more individuals we encourage to contribute, the better our nonprofits reflect the beautiful and diverse tapestry of this country. So now, today, we're going to hear from the 5 senators hosting our town hall. Then they're going to field several questions from our audience. And I am very much honored to introduce to you Senator Mike Lee from Utah, Senator Chris Coons from Delaware, Senator Jim Lankford from Oklahoma, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire. And now I turn the floor over to Senator Lee to begin the opening remarks. First up, Senator Lee.
Thanks so much. It's very kind of you to be willing to host this, and I want to thank everyone joining us as participants and as presenters for having this important conversation. In his 1861 address to Congress, Abraham Lincoln said that the fundamental purpose of government is to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all a fair chance and a fair start in the race of life. Sometimes those weights, those constraints, those things that need to be cleared from the path are themselves imposed by government. And one of the reasons why we need to fight to protect and to expand, to extend the benefits of the charitable contribution deduction has to do with those very weights. There's never been a more important time than right now to do this, as people are suffering, as one of the great resources that we have in this country consists of our are pillars, are institutions of civil society, those things that are not part of government. I think about this a lot. I think in particular about one of my personal favorite charitable institutions, an entity created just a few years ago in Salt Lake City, Utah, called the Other Side Academy. It ties into another one of my great passions, which is criminal justice reform. The Other Side Academy is a school, a place where people can go either as an alternative to long-term incarceration, or in some cases to overcome addiction or to start off their life in a new and better way after years of chemical dependency and other adverse behaviors. The Other Side Academy is a place that was created by a number of people, including some recovering addicts themselves, who understood that there is a really high risk of recidivism in our criminal justice system, and that if you could get people living together and working together, who could teach each other life skills and certain trade skills that could help them get a job, help them do something that's marketable, you could get them on a path that discourages them from recommitting the same offenses that originally led them to be incarcerated. Entities like the Other Side Academy exist in this country precisely because we are free, precisely because we reward and at least don't punish those people who decide to try to make the world a better place. This is exactly why it's important for us to have this conversation, to protect and even extend the charitable contribution deduction. I look forward to the conversation we're going to have today.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Now, next, Senator Coons will share his comments.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you for your leadership of Girl Scouts of the USA. And thank you to everybody from the nonprofit sector who's on with us today. As America works its way through three simultaneous national tragedies, the challenge of the pandemic, the challenge of the economic recession that's resulting from the pandemic, and the challenge of a renewed sense of the deep racial injustices that have long divided us. We need the nonprofit sector more than ever to help bring us together and to help us address these long-term and structural divides that have made success and opportunity in the United States so unevenly distributed across the people of our nation. In my home state of Delaware, I've been inspired by ways that folks have come together to make donations of PPE, to show support for the frontline workers in healthcare who are battling the pandemic, to fight some of the economic roots of racial injustice, and to make sure that we're giving a voice for those on the margins and those who have been at the receiving end of racial inequality in Delaware by supporting legal aid. There's another divide I want to briefly talk about, and that's that out of 7 Americans who makes a contribution or a gift, typically 1 keeps their receipt to get a tax deduction, and the other 6, and those typically of lesser means, do not. And that's unjust. We ought to value the charitable contributions of every American. It's also ineffective. If more Americans were acknowledged for and supported in their charitable deductions, there would be more giving, there'd be more donations. $300, which is what working together this bipartisan group of senators was able to accomplish in the CARES Act, is far better than nothing. But it doesn't reflect the magnitude of goodwill that I'm seeing in my state and we're hearing about all over the country. So we have to work together to further strengthen that. I am so proud of what Delaware's community and our charities have done so far. The Community Foundation, the United Way, the Delaware Alliance for Nonprofits, they've worked together to find creative ways to address these 3 epidemics of economic challenge, of health challenge, and of racial challenge. The YMCA of Delaware has been distributing food up and down our state to newly hungry Delawareans suffering from economic disruption. The LACC has a relief fund for undocumented individuals and Latinos left out of federal relief. There are so many things that are happening at the local level in my community that excite me. But frankly, more than anything else, I'm encouraged by the bipartisan spirit you see among the senators in front of you, and that you represent the ways in which we come together to confront this moment. Thanks for a chance to be on. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Senator Coons. And now we're going to hear from Senator Lankford.
Sylvia, thanks very much. Thanks everybody for being on this web call. I would assume that the folks that are on this web call have been on a lot of web calls lately, trying to be able to help folks in different organizations and trying to be able to help us walk through all that has happened through this pandemic time period. So let me just thank you initially for getting on another one. There's a lot that we have to be able to do that we're trying to be able to build towards presenting another option. This group worked very hard to be able to get a $300 deduction above the line, as Sylvia had mentioned, so everyone could take advantage of that during this time period, and we could encourage people to be more engaged. But we're continuing to be able to work towards increasing that. That if there is another bill that comes up in the days ahead to be able to continue to respond to COVID-19, we hope to be able to expand this. So I appreciate your engagement in the days ahead as we kind of lay out some ideas. The initial proposal that we had put in front of our colleagues was to be able to have a much larger deduction than $300. We were able to get $300, but I remember smiling at Chris Coons at one point and saying, that's camel's nose under the tent. We're going to keep pushing for more to be able to get this done. Now that we've got the first step, let's continue to be able to push this through the process. And the basic reason for that is our American structure is set up with 3 safety nets. Our first safety net is the family, obviously. Our second safety net are not-for-profits around the country. The third safety net is government. And there's a continual push to say, well, just government will do more and more of this, and government will take more and more of this on. Government can't do it as efficiently or as personally as families and not-for-profits can. You are the primary place where people go in communities where they need help. Whether you're a very small town in Western Oklahoma, or where you're a very large community, or a very large nonprofit, or one with one employee running out of their bedroom. Those not-for-profits are meeting immediate needs around their communities. And part of our target is, what can we do to make sure they stay alive, they stay thriving, because the greater the needs that we have in the country, the greater the need we have for not-for-profits all around the country. So thanks for doing what you're doing all the time, but especially during this time, because you've got an enormous number of people pulling on you, both your staff and your team with the specific needs they have in their families, and thousands of people in communities. So thanks for staying engaged. Our country absolutely needs you to be healthy and strong.
Thank you very much, Senator Lankford. Next up, Senator Klobuchar.
The Girl Scouts. I was a campfire girl, but that's okay. And we sat around the same fires, I think. And I also want to thank my colleagues here today. I just came back from our state. We have been through something that I never thought could be this sad. There's sadness on everyone's faces, and but there is also a commitment to justice for George Floyd, but also a commitment to heal our community again. And this Sunday, my husband and I went to one of the sites where people were delivering food. There has been 200 of our inner city grocery stores and businesses that have been destroyed. And literally there are places where people don't have food. And so it calls to focus right at that moment why we need nonprofits. It is the nonprofits that have been counseling people and standing with them as we take on this scourge of racial inequality and discrimination and the police violence that we saw. It is the nonprofits that are having people's backs when it comes to making sure they're going to get the diapers and the food and everything that we saw in various centers across our state that literally, not just in the weekend, but for a long period of time, aren't going to have a pharmacy within miles and aren't going to have a grocery store within miles. And so it just makes our commitment to this work and your work even more important. In addition to this really important bipartisan bill, I've introduced, and I'm proud to have as my co-sponsors, Senator Schatz and Brown and Wyden, a bill that would create a grant program, and it's called Work Now, to try to tie the fact that we have now and we're going to have in the future so many unemployed. And of course, this bill, the tax deduction we're talking about, would also help here. We're going to have so many people that don't have jobs, and yet the needs for our nonprofits are going to be bigger than ever. And so the idea, just as Franklin Roosevelt did when he set up, and I know Senator Coons has worked so hard on his bill, which I also support, on expanding community service, the idea here was when you have so many people out of work, they want to do something. And that was part of the cry that we saw of the peaceful protesters on our streets. And they are hurt economically as well as by the scourge of racism in our justice system. And the answer to me is making sure that they have jobs. And nonprofits are a great place for them to be right now because of the great needs we have. So to me, it's this combination of making sure our nonprofits stay strong, whether it is Catholic Charities of Minnesota that are losing like $1 million a month, whether it is Habitat for Humanity, which had to lay off a bunch of people up in Duluth, whether it is Churches United in Moorhead, whether it is the Girl Scouts, or so many of our nonprofits that are suffering. So I just want to thank my colleagues for being willing to stand up on a bipartisan basis. I'm very hopeful when we have this kind of support that we're going to be able to get this done. And so I'm looking to the future in so many ways right now for the work that we have to do in the Senate. And as Senator Lankford just mentioned, I liked when he mentioned that there would be a package, or as we work on a package, those words, right, Chris, right, Jeanne? Our words are just sweet words for all of us that we have to get moving on this now. And I want to thank Senator Lee, my pal, for his work on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar. Finally, we're going to hear from Senator Shaheen.
Mute, you got to unmute you. Are you unmuted?
Got it?
There we go.
There we go. Yay.
All right. Thank you very much, Sylvia, for emceeing this discussion, and to all of my colleagues who have shown such leadership on this issue. I was a Girl Scout, so I very much appreciate the work that the Girl Scouts do. And you and all of my colleagues on the call have spoken so eloquently to the importance of nonprofits in our states and across this country. In New Hampshire, where we pride ourselves on small government and public-private partnerships to do a lot of the work of providing services, the nonprofit sector makes up 15% of the jobs in New Hampshire and 14% of the gross state product. So it's a very important sector. We had our Center for Nonprofits do a pulse survey back in April after the bottom fell out because of the coronavirus. And what they found was that 92% of nonprofits said they had lost at least a third of their revenue. And that is on top of a beginning drop in charitable contributions through 2019. So this has hit the nonprofit sector very hard. And it's such a critical part of our state that what we've seen is the legislature and the governor are taking some of that state dollars that went to New Hampshire as part of the CARES Act, and they've set up a fund, a $60 million fund that's going to go to nonprofits. It's going to be administered by our Community Development Finance Authority, New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and the Center for Nonprofits. But what they expect is that those dollars are going to go very fast and not be able to provide for the thousands of small nonprofits that are going to need help. And that's why looking at what we can do through the charitable deduction is so important. We want people to be able to donate to nonprofits, whether they support the arts, whether they support providing food, whether they support helping the homeless. It's a critical part of our state and a critical part of the fabric of this country. And we've got to make sure that those nonprofits survive this coronavirus and the economic challenges that they're facing, and that they're able to stand back up again and continue the great work that they're all doing. So thank you. I'm pleased to be part of this conversation and look forward to the question.
Thank you very much, Senator Shaheen. You know, we have over 4,000 people online today. So let's turn it over to the audience. So we have several of our nonprofit leaders with us today to ask questions for the senators. First up, from the United Way of Delaware, we have CEO Michelle Taylor.
Senator Coons, even during this pandemic, it seems Republicans and Democrats oppose each other on everything. Why do you think the six of you have found bipartisan common ground on this issue? And what hope can you give us that we can find more common ground in the midst of this national crisis?
Well, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the question, and thanks for your wonderful leadership of United Way. You know, frankly, we are friends and we know each other and work together because of ways in which we've connected. I'm just going to mention one briefly. Senator Lankford and I were the co-chairs of the weekly bipartisan Senate prayer breakfast in the last Congress. And even though we have very different views on a number of important issues, fiscal issues and social issues, that vulnerability, that time together, that dedication to knowing each other through a shared journey of faith has actually helped us to also identify areas we are really passionate about working on together. And frankly, ever since the enactment of the 2017 law, we worked together on a variety of things. There was a provision in that Tax Cut and Jobs Act that impacted nonprofits in particular. I remember hearing stories from folks in Delaware who felt like they had to go out and actually like measure out their parking lot and figure out how much of a benefit employees were getting from free parking, something they'd never had to do. And we actually ignored folks saying that you can't fix that or you can't touch that aspect of the law and work to get it resolved, to repeal that specific provision. Let me close with an encouraging reminder. Just about 2 months ago, the Senate, in a little over a week, put together an 800-page bill called the CARES Act that dedicated $2.3, I think, trillion to helping our country respond to and recover from the pandemic, and it passed the Senate unanimously. So in the face of the scale of the kind of crisis we have right now, we've demonstrated recently the ability to work across the aisle and to embrace big solutions and to get things done. And what you heard from all of us is we know that our nonprofit community is absolutely essential to finding that path forward.
Thank you very much for the question, important question about bipartisanship, and obviously the answer as well. You know, our next question is coming from Kate Rubalcaba, from the CEO of the Utah Nonprofits Association. Kate?
Senator Lee, you have dedicated yourself to exploring the state of our nation's social capital through your work on the Joint Economic Committee. How can reforming the charitable deduction impact our communities and the everyday lives of Americans?
A great question. Thank you so much for asking that, Kate, and thanks for all you do in our state to promote involvement on an individual level with some of the most important entities that help drive our state's economy and keep us safe and keep us free and prosperous as a people. As the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, I've undertaken this project that we call the Social Capital Project because I wanted to try to measure that which government historically has been very incapable of measuring. In other words, we're good at measuring things like gross domestic product, economic growth, the amount of tax revenue we collect. We have a much more difficult time analyzing the extent to which people are connected to each other through neighborhood organizations, civic and charitable organizations, through religious organizations. But what we've found is that insofar as those things have been measured, while they're tough to measure, they're very key economic indicators that provide us with sort of an advanced glimpse of what we're looking at as a society, economically, socially, and in every other way. These are issues that are neither Republican nor Democratic. They're neither liberal nor conservative. But they do provide us with a really good analysis into the overall health of the country. Just as a physician who's trained in medicine can tell a lot more about you if your doctor has the ability to sit down with you and to measure your blood, to take out and analyze things. He or she can see things that can't be seen from the outside. We can understand those things better if we understand the extent to which people are engaging with each other. If they're involved in a Rotary Club or an Elks Club, or if they're involved with a religious organization, or they're involved with the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Campfire Girls, or any other enterprise like that. We can tell a lot about their ability, the likelihood that they will have to be able to complete their education, to be able to get a job, to be able to make and keep commitments to other people in their lives. That in turn will tell us a lot about the extent to which we're thriving as a country. There's no single policy that I can think of that would do more to promote and encourage social connectedness than expanding and protecting the charitable contribution deduction within our tax code. We can do this, but we do have to do it. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this effort.
Senator, thank you very much for your answer. Next up, we have Tom Blonsky. He's the president and CEO of Catholic Charities of New Hampshire. Tom, over to you.
Great. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Great. So Senator Shaheen, for over 100 years, our tax code has provided a deduction for charitable contributions, and most everyone believed that it was a reasonably efficient way to promote charitable giving in the context of a progressive tax system. How would moving the charitable deduction further above the line fit in with this notion?
Well, again, as I said earlier, and as you know very well in New Hampshire, and thank you for the great work that Catholic Charities does, the nonprofit sector is really critical. It employs a lot of people. It provides a lot of services, whether it's the arts or social services, and we need to make sure that we do everything possible to continue to support those nonprofits. And that's why moving that charitable contribution above the line so that we can encourage people to make those contributions is so important. And one of my favorite examples as we look at what's made a difference during this pandemic is the New Hampshire Food Bank, which Catholic Charities in New Hampshire knows very well. You have been great supporters and behind the food bank and making sure that it's successful. But that's an organization in New Hampshire that has 425 partners. It serves the entire state. During this pandemic, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of families who need food, and the food bank has responded by setting up modified drive-through giveaways where they can go into communities and allow people to come. In just several weeks, they served 5,000 people in 5 communities around New Hampshire, and that's a lot of people in New Hampshire where we had one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country before the pandemic. So the important thing too about the New Hampshire Food Bank is, like so many other nonprofits, it doesn't take any federal or state money. So they depend on those charitable contributions. They are so important. And we need to make sure that we do everything possible to encourage people, both those with means and those who understand how important it is for all of us to support the nonprofits that help underpin the values that we all support, to make sure that people can make those contributions without having it impact their bottom line in a way that makes it difficult for them. So that's why this effort is so important. And I'm so pleased that we have such a great representation of the Senate supporting this effort. And I hope that bodes well for us to be able to get something done.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Just judging from the fact that we have people from all 50 states and thousands of people on, people are very interested and supportive of the work that you all are doing. Well, our fourth question comes from Roberta S. Clark. She's the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Greater Oklahoma City. Roberta?
Senator Lankford, some critics of expanding the charitable deduction say that it would cost too much revenue if the limits for the deduction were to be greatly expanded. It would cost revenue, but isn't there a trade-off in terms of return on investment for the foregone federal revenue?
Yeah, there absolutely is, Roberta. You know it full well. And thanks for your leadership there as well. But when you do anything in the tax code, there's always a trade-off. The accountants up here in DC will always look at any change in the tax code and everything is neutral. If you change anything on the tax code, they'll say then you're taking away from revenue somewhere else. We understand, looking at this not as an accountant, but as policy actually works and how it works in real life in America, in the sense that you look at it and say, you don't just remove from one and add to another one and it's exactly the same. the more nonprofits are active, the more that they can do, the more that they thrive, the more that they assist, the less government has to be able to step in and assist, because those individuals are getting help from their families and from local nonprofits. So when people invest into nonprofit, let's say they get a 25% on their tax rate, then that means that there's probably $4 that's going into that family and $1 in write-off then on their taxes. That's additional help that's going to that additional person. That's less need that they have in other areas. It actually creates greater efficiency. Now you've got to be able to look at the big picture to be able to see it. But as I go back to before from my opening statement on it, there really are three safety nets. There's the family, there's nonprofits, and then there's government. And if there's a sense that government has to collect revenue from all over the country and then redistribute that to everyone to be able to be more efficient, they've missed that center point of our safety net, and that is not for profit. So our focus is, my focus is, the more we can have healthy nonprofits, even if that changes, quote unquote, our revenue coming into the federal government, it actually increases assistance that are going to individuals all over the country, and it creates greater efficiency in how that's actually delivered. Government cost of assistance is always more expensive than a not-for-profit cost of assistance. So if we're trying to get help to people, encourage more giving to not-for-profits, that gets more help to more people.
Thank you very much for that answer. You know, our next question is coming from Louise Welch-Williams. She's the regional CEO of South Carolina of the American Red Cross. Louise?
Thank you. Senator Lankford, while I am from the great state of South Carolina, your Red Cross CEO is Alice Townsend. So thank you for your support. Some critics complain that any above-the-line deduction would be hard to enforce and could result in some fraudulently claimed deductions. Isn't this a challenge in many areas of the tax code?
No, it's a challenge in every area of the tax code. Thanks for what you're doing, by the way. I'm sorry that Tim Scott couldn't join us today. He had planned to be able to be here as well. He is a big part of this whole effort to be able to be here, but couldn't join us at the last minute on that. So I apologize that he couldn't be here. But yeah, that is a challenge in every area of the tax code. Most every single area of our tax code is something that's done on the honor system. It is a really odd system to the rest of the world, but quite frankly, everyone who turns their taxes in, if they're self-employed, there's very seldom that they're actually audited, and most people know it. Now, there's this sense in the back of your mind at any point when you turn in your taxes this year on July 15th rather than on April 15th, when you turn in your taxes, you think, oh, I hope I'm not audited. I hope I've got all my documents together. I hope all this is right. Everyone always has that kind of pit in their stomach, but in reality, only a fraction of our taxes are actually audited around the country. So the challenge that we have with any kind of deduction like this is, again, the bean counters in Washington, D.C. will assume if we have a $300 deduction, every single American is going to take the $300 deduction, whether they actually donated to a not-for-profit or not. I don't believe that's true. Now, will there be people that will do fraudulent returns on it? Yes, there will be, as there is in every program. We've seen that, for instance, in our unemployment assistance right now around the country, where there's been a lot of fraud during this time period where people are just filing inappropriately. That's going to happen in it. But the vast majority of Americans are going to turn in their system honestly in it. There have been a couple of proposals that are floated out there. One is requiring greater documentation. That if you have it, you've got to be able to keep that document. As Chris Coons mentioned before, only about 1 in 7 folks actually keep their documents to actually be able to turn that in. There is been a focus from some of the folks here to say, what if we required people when they turned in their documentation had that number from the not-for-profit, their identification number that's on their 990. That when you turned over a form to say, thank you so much for donating to us, at the bottom of that form was your identification number from the nonprofit. When they filled out their taxes, then they would also include that number to be able to show that they were connected to it. Now, it's not forcing the nonprofit to also be able to file that information, but it's one additional step that literally someone would have to not only make up an amount they gave, make up an organization, but make up a number on it. And there was a lot of folks would say, well, it's going to be a bridge too far. I can't really validate that. That is being discussed at this point to try to figure out if that's a way to be able to help us be able to validate this. But long-term, we've got to be able to make sure whatever we do is simple for the not-for-profits, because as you know well, most of our not-for-profits are very small. They're 1 or 2 person operations. So it's got to be exceptionally simple for them in turning things in. And it's got to be exceptionally simple for those individuals that are donating because we don't want to do anything to be able to discourage people to be able to donate and get engaged.
Thank you very much for that thorough answer. You know, our final question, it's going to come from the CEO of the YMCA Twin Cities, Glenn Gunderson. Glenn?
Thank you, Sylvia. Senator Klobuchar, good to see you again in virtual means. We're so thankful for your contributions to our nonprofit community, and certainly calling from Minneapolis, it's a heck of a time to be from this city, and a lot of emotions, as you said earlier. All of us on this call are excited about the prospect of Congress taking real action to increase the charitable deduction for all taxpayers. What efforts is this coalition working on to increase the current $300 above the line deduction to help during this crisis?
Well, first of all, thank you, Glenn. I was once on one of the branch YMCA's boards, and luckily there's no video of my aerobics classes in early age. And I know you do such great work, so thank you for that. I also think as we look at this politically and the actions you're taking, what you're going to get this done, I think that your association would best know what you're doing. I just know what we need to do. If you've noticed, everyone that is on this bill now gets a town hall meeting with 4,000 people and get asked a question for their local nonprofit. That's probably a good beginning. I use that as an example, but as one way to get members interested both in the House and the Senate. You know, you're not really going to the offices right now because of COVID, but it's to call them, yes, to email them, yes. But I think featuring these kinds of events in each state really gets members interested, even if they get on the bill or if in their district, if they're interested in it, and really lifting that up, because I think you all know we're in kind of an ugly part of our politics right now, and there's a lot of a divide, and I think anything you can do to, one, play up the bipartisan nature of this, which we all do by our presence right now with this town hall, and then two, lift up the people that are willing to speak out, not just say, oh great, it's a nonprofit, good job, and do press conferences with you on things, but actually are willing to stand up like these Democrats and Republicans on this call to help you with your funding in the form, as Senator Lankford so well put out, the value that you get from this, that this isn't a loophole, it's actually a lifeline for so many people. Making those cases, I think, makes a big, big difference. And then finally, the stories that you have right now more than ever, the nonprofits on the front lines feeding people, the lines for the food shelves, people who used to work in the food shelves that I've heard of are now in line at the food shelves. The stories of, I just told you from Minnesota, the meeting I had with African-American faith leaders who said they are needed now more than ever, but if they have to go defunct because there's not enough support for nonprofits, we're in trouble. And there is no vaccine for the two earlier pandemics that Senator Coons laid out. There is a vaccine for COVID, but there's not going to be a set one solution and a vaccine for the economic crisis we're in or the racial crisis that we're in. That is going to take this day-to-day hard work of people on the front line. So tell the stories, make sure you emphasize that it's bipartisan, and then also whatever the nonprofits can do to get people by calling them members involved in this. It's a fast moving vehicle in the next few weeks, fast for Washington standards. So we need you to make those calls now. And then if you can say, hey, you support it, great. We want to do a Zoom call with some of the nonprofits in the area and a press thing for them so that actually their support is real. It's not just showing up and saying, good job. They're actually doing work for you. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that enthusiastic response, Senator Klobuchar. Now I'm going to turn the floor back over to Senator Lee for closing thoughts.
Thanks so much. Thanks again for everyone who has joined us on this. This really is an important effort. I want to make clear that all of the members who are on this call, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Shaheen, Senator Lankford, and Senator Coons, and I believe we would speak correctly for Senator Tim Scott as well, are dedicated to not only protecting but also expanding the charitable contribution deduction permanently to the size of the standard deduction. And for now, what we're hoping to do, I think it's time to push now to push for the expansion to 1/3 of the standard deduction for the tax years of 2019 and 2020. This represents a really important moment. Senators Lankford and Coons had talked about the camel's nose into the tent, and it's into the tent. It's time to take it another couple of steps into the tent now, and taking it up to 1/3 of the standard deduction for tax years 2019 and 2020, I think, I think all of us would agree, is the logical next step toward this. And so for those of you with a phone or an email account or any access to any social media or any access to any senator or member of the House of Representatives, which I assume represents all within the sound of my voice, and anyone who meets those criteria and also happens to agree with us on this, I'd encourage you to make your opinions on the matter known, because there's never been a better time than right now to move this policy forward. I think this is something that we will find will inure to the benefit of everyone. I really like James Lankford's description of the 3 categories of safety nets. You've got families, and then you've got nonprofits, and you've got the government. The government can't possibly do its job in providing its portion of the safety net, in addition to the other things governments have to do. If the other 2 buckets have holes in them, if the other 2 buckets have been harmed in particular by the government, and in addition to other things that we're dealing with as a society right now. So in addition to this being a really good opportunity, the need is just much more pronounced right now than it ever has been before. I think probably more than at any other moment in any of our lifetimes. The need is a pronounced one right now, and we need your help. Please help us to help you, and in the process, help us to help you to make our country better. This is something that will not only strengthen our economy, not only strengthen our ability to provide needful services to those most vulnerable members of our society who need it most, but they'll also strengthen the very moral and social fabric of our country, helping us to thrive and to succeed, to elevate the human condition. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks especially for joining us in this effort.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Well, Senators, on behalf of all my wonderful colleagues from nonprofits across the country, I want to express our deep gratitude for your leadership. We hope that more of your colleagues will raise attention to our organizations, our need for resources, and the imperative role of charitable giving in this country. And to that end, I encourage all my nonprofit colleagues to do what the senators have said, to contact other senators, to ask them to co-sponsor this Universal Charitable Deduction bill. And I challenge you to share your stories with the media. Reach out to your local newspapers. Deploy your social media channels. Include the hashtag Relief for Charities. That's hashtag Relief, the number 4, and Charities. Raise a call to action. I ask you, if not now, then when? And so with that, I thank everyone who's participated in this afternoon. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.